Who's the bigger fool? Marvel for pretending to kill Spider-Man, or me for believing it? But Spider-Man does become a god, so this is going to be a really cool ending to this story. But what this does is this continues the whole thing about the 8 deaths of Spider-Man. And like we mentioned, at the end of the last video, it looked like Spider-Man was actually dead, and technically he was killed. He is officially dead in Marvel Comics. But we also got kind of an expansion on what was actually going on. That what we initially thought was happening was that there was just kind of a bargain, right? A wager that was struck between Cyttorak and Doctor Strange. Cyttorak wants to invade Earth. Doctor Strange, of course, doesn't want to allow that to happen. And so the bargain that was struck between the two of them was that Doctor Strange every year would fight the children of Cyttorak. And if at any point one of the children successfully killed Doctor Strange, that would allow Cyttorak to invade the main Marvel universe. As most of you guys know, that never really seemed to happen. Kind of an aside here, a lot of you guys were asking in the comments how powerful Cyttorak is. Just as an indication, just to kind of demonstrate how capable this guy is in relation to other people, because he doesn't really cross over with the main Marvel universe all that much. In Doctor Strange Sorcerer Supreme number 44, he pulled Galactus into his own realm and overpowered him. So yeah, Cyttorak is incredibly powerful in Marvel Comics. He's immensely powerful. But what we ended up learning, right, focusing on this story, what we ended up learning is that the wager between the two was much bigger than that. That what was actually happening here was that Cyttorak was kind of a block for the Blight, in the same way that at one point, Galactus was the gatekeeper for Abraxas. If Galactus dies, Abraxas is unleashed and just starts wreaking havoc across the multiverse. The same thing here, that when it came to Cyttorak, if the wager was lost and the champion died, it wasn't really Cyttorak invading the universe, it was opening the door for the Blight to enter. Now again, the Blight is very ambiguous in Marvel Comics. The nature of it, its existence really, was just revealed to us in the last issue. And because it is a character that's kind of introduced within the context of the story, I don't imagine that we'll really see anything else from it again. All we really know is the Blight is just kind of like this multiversal force of negative energy, for lack of a better word. Soul rot, as they call it, right? It infects an individual and it just kind of twists them into an evil version of themselves, right? And so all this was basically enabled by Callix, the son of Cyttorak, or one of Cyttorak's sons. Just kind of a quick little thing here. Callix is the son who's pissed because his dad just doesn't really give him enough attention. And like he just doesn't really feel like he gets respect from his dad. So like he just wants to prove how capable he is. And then ultimately became infected by the Blight itself. It's the Blight's avatar on Earth. And then essentially it's just kind of like allowing the Blight to enter is really all it is, right? So at the end of the day, you have Cyra, who's kind of standing over Spider-Man, right? She's one of the scions. She was originally going to just like fight Spider-Man and be the one to kill him or whatever, but for some reason that she hasn't fully been able to understand, her tune has changed. She's no longer this person, this scion, who's just like Spider-Man is a guy that I have to defeat, and she believes wholeheartedly in the idea of her father and the death of the champion and so on and so forth. She doesn't really understand what's going on. And so while Callix just, kind of teases her a little bit and is like, yes, the end is nigh, yada, 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 you are not the sister that I knew, and so on and so forth. Phil Coulson is here. Now remember, Phil Coulson is basically the avatar of death, right? There's no more Mistress Death. She's an Infinity Stone hanging out with Thanos. Now Phil Coulson is death. And this is this kind of statement that he makes, where he's watching Callix and Cyra go back and forth. And he says, it's a little late to discover your capacity to care about people, Cyra, scion of Cyttorak. Late for Spider-Man, at least. So if you'll excuse me, I have to get to work. And he's like, thanks to your brother, I'm about to be very, very busy. And that's where she says, honored avatar of death, I know that you must carry on with your grim work, but this is all wrong. Cyttorak is the most powerful of the quintessence. And even if Strange speaks true and Cyttorak did not know of the Blight, my father yields to no one and no thing. Why does he not fight back against my brother? And that's where Phil asks her, like, is that what you're really asking? Or is something else bothering you? And so you kind of get this really interesting moment because you switch over to Doctor Strange and Doctor Doom for a second, right? Yes, Doctor Strange is in his non-corporeal form, his spirit form. Yes, Doctor Doom is a Sorcerer Supreme because Doctor Doom basically stole the power of Doctor Strange and Doctor Strange is dead. For those of you guys who are familiar with Doctor Strange and Marvel Comics, whenever Marvel wants to take his powers away and make someone else the Sorcerer Supreme, they kill him. and his powers become somebody else's for a temporary period of time. And then because it's magic, right? It's Marvel's version of the Speed Force from DC Comics. You don't got to explain it. It's just stuff that happens. That Doctor Strange ends up regaining his powers. I mean, truth to tell, I'm not even. I mean, I'm being a little glib, but like that's really how it works in Marvel. They kill Stephen Strange. His powers go to usually whoever it was that killed him or some good guy. They get to be Sorcerer Supreme for a little while. The powers are handed back over, and Stephen Strange regains his physical form. It's kind of been his MO for the last few years in Marvel Comics, a way for Marvel to kind of keep his character somewhat interesting and relevant. And so that's why he's here and he's chastising Doctor Doom. Because what he says is, you're acting like a teenager, right? You want all the benefits of adulthood with none of the responsibility. And that's not how this works. When you took my mantle as Sorcerer Supreme and all the power that came with it, you also took all the responsibility that came with it, all the tasks of making sure that the various dimensions across the universe don't invade each other and things don't go sideways. Because if two dimensions out there in the universe go to war against each other, that war can impact us on Earth. So you have to keep an eye on all those things. But it also means this covenant with Cyttorak was your covenant as well. It was your whole deal. The entire idea was that you would be the one to face off against the children of Cyttorak and you would stave off impending doom. But you chose not to. You took the easy way out. You didn't think it was important enough. You handed it off to Spider-Man and said, "You're my champion now," and just thrust him into this impossible situation that he had no idea how to understand. And while Stephen Strange tried to guide him as best as he could, at the end of the day, he couldn't prepare Spider-Man for everything. Because while Stephen Strange has fought these different champions consistently, it's a whole different beast when they're fighting someone else because their tactics change. The strategies they use change. So the best that Doctor Strange can say is, hey, this guy is most likely going to come at you this way, but he came at me that way, so I don't know exactly how he's going to come at you, right? And so where he's chastising Doctor Doom this whole time, as you guys know, Doctor Doom doesn't take lip off of anybody. So he immediately blasts Doctor Strange and is like, do not question your betters. And so at that point, you switch back over to Callix, Cyttorak, Cyra, and or Cyra, however you want to pronounce it, and Spider-Man and Phil Coulson. And the conversation between Phil Coulson's death and Cyra herself is he says, Cyttorak sat in his throne immovable. Your brother lusted for power that he'd never have. The covenant, game or not, began as it had many times before. And he says, and you didn't care about any of it until you did. And that's where she says, until Spider-Man endured the deaths that I showed him. And Phil Coulson says, wrong, but you're so close. He felt them, he carried them, not the deaths. And that's where it hits to her. She says, the lives. And Phil Coulson says, you and your father are essentially immortal. You see curvature of the horizon of time. From that detached point of view, it's easy to believe that nothing matters, which is a true statement, right? There is such a thing as being so far removed from the goings on in the world that you forget what actually matters in the world. And you forget the degrees of separation that people have, right? The idea of 6 degrees of separation, you're only ever 6 people away from everybody on Earth. You pass a guy at the airport, that guy passes somebody else, they pass somebody else. You get to the 5th person who works with the 6th person in a building, and you're 6 degrees separated from like some prime minister somewhere, or some king, and there are some super rich person in the Saudi family. So we're only ever 6 degrees disconnected, which is a pretty incredible concept when you think about it. But when you're someone like Cyttorak, and really even his children, who are effectively immortal, what initially starts off as a kind of fascination with humanity and its very nature turns into boredom, because you do kind of start to see certain patterns among people, and the more bored you become, the more detached you become, and the less concerned you become with the value of life. And that's why Phil Coulson says, one day an insignificant player entered your game and your perspective shifted. Your eyes fell from the endless horizon and land squarely in the now. What's happening now? And she says, Cyttorak is not immovable. He's paralyzed by loss. And that's where she says, but he can't feel loss. And that's where Phil Coulson's like, now you're figuring it out. And she's like, unless he feels love. Now, this is going to be a very contested point among Marvel comic fans who are huge fans of Cyttorak. And the reason for that is because historically speaking in Marvel, right, if you look at the old Doctor Strange Sorcerer Supreme comics, the old X-Men comics, even stories like Fear itself, that Cyttorak is portrayed really in only one way, especially when you look at stories like the Eighth Day event, right, where you get like Eighth Day Juggernaut, things like that. Cyttorak is an incredibly powerful god of the highest order, and he's right up there with guys like Dormammu and Chthon and so on and so forth in varying ways, right? It's not an absolute even field. It's not linear, right? It shifts around. But at the end of the day, he's always kind of been portrayed as this incredibly, I don't know if I would say evil, more like a malevolent force, but and also detached force. And so it's one of these things where he can be angry and he can get jealous. A good example of this is during the story of Fear itself, when Cain Marco became a herald for the serpent, the brother of Odin, and that he effectively took on an additional god's power in addition to the power that he had. And this led to Cyttorak basically taking the power of the juggernaut away from Cain Marco and giving it to Colossus. And so that's how basically you got unstoppable Colossus in Marvel. Yes, we cover that story. I know a lot of you guys are new comic book readers and you probably don't even know who I am. But yes, we cover that story like 7 years ago on the channel. We've been doing this for so long. And so the idea of Marvel suddenly coming along and saying, actually, Cyttorak is this being that feels the love of a parent like anybody else, the love of a friend, that he's more of a kind and compassionate being, not wholly evil, that's gonna rub some people the wrong way. Because truth to tell, I think it's a lot more interesting when Cyttorak is just this dark, brooding, evil type of malevolent dude, because it gives you this sort of feeling that, like, if he were to ever invade Earth, he's not going to have like a great big huge cookout for the superheroes. Hey guys, it's me, Cyttorak. Let's all have a barbecue at my place. Bring the beers. I'll bring the food. We'll have a great time. No. Cyttorak's going to show up on Earth and everyone is going to die. Right? It's just one of those things. It makes the character a lot more interesting and it makes the gravitas of his appearances far more significant. But it all kind of depends on how you feel about all this. And so at the end of the day, that's what Phil Coulson tells her, right? That's what your father is feeling. It's what you are feeling. You're feeling the experience of love. And Spider-Man is the reason why, right? But the idea here is that this love is not just predicated on like the value of life and the sanctity of life and things like that, but it's the value of what it means to live a life and to be willing to sacrifice your life for the benefit of others. And so it literally changes this girl's mind. And she's like, I want to strike a bargain. And that's where Phil Coulson is like, I mean, death can't really bargain, which is true. Historically speaking, with the exception of some very small exceptions, basically Deadpool and Thanos, Mistress Death historically did not bargain. When it came to your time, right, when it was your time to go, it was your time to go. And she would drag you in to the realm of death, kicking and screaming if she had to, but one way or another, it was curtains. Your time was up. And so you never really had any kind of bargaining power there. It's just the way things were. But in this instance, Phil Coulson is a little bit different and functions a little bit different. I wouldn't go so far as to say that he was willing to bend and break the rules, but I will say that in this particular instance, she makes a good point, and she's like, okay, death can be staved off. Reeds, magic, a trade, the power and immortality of a scion of Cyttorak to restore one indomitable human spirit. I will give you my immortality if you will bring Spider-Man back. And that's where he says, okay, I mean, okay, yeah, all right, we could kind of fudge the numbers a bit, right? Strange's use of the reeds was unorthodox, but there was precedent for the pact with Ragador. It was basically a giant screw you to, from one god to another. So basically, it's his way of saying, all right, we can kind of shift these things around a little bit and we can do it once, right? And so the question is, when she asks, can you do it? He asks, can you? Because what you're doing is you're giving up the entire life you've known up to this point, this massive sacrifice that you're making that the world will never really ever understand. Even Peter Parker will never truly understand it, which is true, right? You can't truly understand the depths of a sacrifice if you can't understand what it means to have had that and then sacrifice it in the first place. And so for someone like Peter Parker, he's never known immortality. So for him, he has no idea what it means to sacrifice immortality. It does not mean that he cannot be grateful, that he cannot be thankful, and he certainly is, because she says, do it, right? Like, I will give up my immortality, take it. And so at the end of the day, he does, right? He says, nay, Benjamin Parker, cause of life, the willing transfer of crimson essence from the offspring of the god Cyttorak to the subject's mortal form, immortality traded for the remaining days of one mortal life. The universe screams, this is not the order of things. Generally, the universe would be right. But I'm new to the job. Surely I'm allowed to make a mistake in the name of love. Not for this girl and not for Peter and not for mine, but Spider-Man's love for everyone. And so literally, Spider-Man pops back up. Now, this is where things get dope because Spider-Man shows up here in just kind of his spiritual form, right? And he's like, thank you doesn't really seem to be big enough and that kind of thing, and she's like, look, you don't need to thank me. You don't need to do anything. She's like, you simply just need to become, right? Become a weapon and shed the role of a pawn. Now, the whole time she's saying this, right? Callix, the son of Cyttorak, is like attacking his father, who's just paralyzed by the feeling of love, something that he's never felt before. And so, like, literally, his son Callix is like, it's my time, right? Like, I will destroy you, I will take your role, and I will literally become the blight in this universe. But the whole time, right? Kyra's talking to Spider-Man, and she's like, become strength incarnate. And she's like, become unstoppable. Because Spider-Man becomes the juggernaut. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Dude, it's nuts. Good thing these comics come out weekly, because next week, we pick up with what I think is the ending of all of this. It's dope. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.